Okay. And in the areas where this is occurring, the violence, how many villages have been destroyed by the Burmese army?
So again, the most accurate figures will represent the north and eastern part of the country, not Arakan and Chin State, but that number would be 3,700 since 1996.
3,700 villages totally wiped out?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And the dams that you mentioned being built, are they in the tribal areas? Are they being built in the tribal areas?
Yes, they are all being built in the tribal areas.
And who is building the dams? Are these being built by conscripted labor, slave labor? Ethnic minorities have been captured for that purpose?
So it's a mixture of imported Chinese labor and conscripted labor. So it's like,
and what percentage would be slave labor?
That I'm not sure. Of the, I think there's about 42 hydropower projects going on in Burma right now. They've influxed many Chinese laborers for this, as well as using forced conscription, but I don't know the percentage for each. And the forced conscription, are these people too old and too young to escape who are eligible to, who are captured for that purpose? Yes. I mean, the age range is from as young as you can imagine to as old as you can imagine. And this is primarily in the Karen and the Kachin area, did you say? I mean, it's not exclusive to the Karen and the Kachin areas, but because you could also include the Shan, and you'll see this very much so with the Rohingya population. You'll see it more so with the Chin coming up with the. Some of these are in the early stages of the development, and so you'll see increased forced labor the further along these projects get in their construction. Okay, now Burma also, these ethnic minorities are not considered Burmese, are they? So the term Burmese just does refer to somebody who's nationally from Burma. The ethnicity comes Burman. So like somebody determining if they are Burmese is something I leave up to that person, because that's considered more of a state identity. The government, the dictatorship, do they consider the ethnic minorities Burmese? They consider them an ethnic nationality Burma, with the exception of the Rohingya. But they now don't use the term Burmese either. They use the term Myanmarese. And so they do consider them Myanmarese, okay, with the exception of the Rohingya. Okay. Now, the ones who managed to escape and get to the Thai border and the refugee camps that we visited, the young people, do they get an opportunity or a right to pursue schooling? Do they get higher education once they go through the elementary? So it gets tricky. Each country that hosts refugees treats them differently, and so you have access to primary education or secondary education for official refugees in official camps. You don't have that access for those who are unofficial refugees, with the exception of those being tolerated right now in the camps in Thailand. We don't know how long that will go on. Well, even for the official refugees, if a student wants to pursue a higher education and go to a college outside of the refugee area, are they permitted? No. No. That was a complaint that I received when I visited hundreds and hundreds of these young people in the refugee camp there in the Karen area. In India, you're talking about the tribal community, correct? Not the Dalits. No. Are the tribal people considered to be Dalits by the Indians? No. No. So in the caste system, the Dalits fall outside of the caste system, right? So they are the untouchables. Right. They are below the 4 classes. Now, the indigenous people would traditionally be, just outside of society in the forests. So they are usually considered, like I said, in the ancient texts, they are referred to as Rakshasas, the demons. We were supposedly so they're not Dalits, but they're sort of on par with them as far as the way they're treated, or below? Below. We are considered Ati Sudra, which roughly translates to below the Dalits as well. Also, because of our status of living away in the forests and being meat eaters, we are considered barbarian, subhuman that category.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're not considered untouchables.
No, we're not unclean in that sense because we do not do. Dalits are considered untouchables because they do what is unclean, and unclean is what is dealing with human wastes or dead things. So if you worked with leather or you worked in the cemetery, right, then you would be considered unclean Dalit. And hence a Dalit.
Dalit, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what is the number of tribal people in India?
Right, so we're 8% of India's population.
What number would that be? How many million?
85 million as of 2001 census. So if you're growing at the same rate as the rest of India, we'd be about 100 million now, 10 years later, yeah.
And what other kind of repression do the tribal people in India undergo? I've heard of violation of, for instance, religious beliefs. What other kinds of human rights abuses do they experience? So
the main human rights abuses right now is in relation to industrialization. So when a company wants to set up, they have to grab land. So there's land acquisition where indigenous people are living. These land acquisitions are in recent times, there's not been a single case of a peaceful land acquisition. They're not done in consultation with the people who live there. And so there are, many small movements. Everywhere there's a little factory coming up, there's a little movement going on over there. And the human rights abuse comes from, sometimes what the people will do is they will, what we call gherao the land, that's encircle that land and keep it safe. So you build a little fortress. The indigenous people will not let the government or the company or the police come in, and then there ends up being a violent altercation. And this just happens because there's lack of communication, lack of understanding of how the process of land acquisition will move forward, because indigenous people perceive that they're not being given a good deal for the land that is being acquired.
Now, back to Burma and land acquisition. This is also occurring with the land being taken for the dam sites. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, it is. Forced displacement is widespread, and it is basically for both controlling the people into controlled areas as well as for development projects.
Now, what about the problem in Burma with child soldiers? I understand there's something like 400,000 child soldiers in the Burmese army. Are some of these or many of these the ethnic minorities?
Well, first, 400,000 is the number of the total armed forces in Burma. There are disputed numbers how many of them are child soldiers, but they sort of consider potentially as up to a quarter of that could potentially be child soldiers, but nobody wants to put an exact figure on it, except to sort of comfortably say that Burma probably has more child soldiers than any other country in the world. Now, there's several different ways in which they get them. Yes, some of them are ethnic minorities being forced to. The other is Burman, the majority, sort of tricking children, young boys forcibly into, so like say they were on their way to the tea shop and they didn't have their identity card, and so their choice was to go to a labor camp or to join the army. And so they, of course, knowing the atrocities that take place in labor camps, pick joining the army instead. And so those sort of situations are very, very common for the Burman population, the majority, as well as for some of the ethnic minorities.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sering, I'm not as familiar with the Pakistani situation. What number of indigenous people in Pakistan I think you spoke of Pakistan, would be in Pakistan?
Well, Gilgit Baltistan is not considered a part of Pakistan. It's a UN-declared disputed territory, and the total population is anywhere close to 2 million people. And about 200,000 of them are Pakistani settlers who have started arriving since 1947.
And in what region of the world is that? Where?
It's up in the north, bordering Afghanistan, Tajikistan, China, and Indian Kashmir. So it used to be part of the former princely state of Kashmir, and in 1947, Pakistan occupied it through its military intervention.
And is that now called Azad Kashmir?
It's north of Azad Kashmir. It's governed directly from Islamabad due to its sensitive geostrategic location, but it is still considered by Pakistani constitution and by the Supreme Court verdict as part of the former princely state of Kashmir and not part of Pakistan.
And what is the religious persuasion of the Gilgit Baltistan people?
Well, Pakistan is predominantly Sunni and Wahhabi, but Gilgit Baltistan is 80% different denominations of Shia. So we have about 10% Ismaili, we have about 10% Sufis, about 60% the Shias who follow the same sect as in Iran or Iraq, and then we have about 20% Sunni.
And what is the primary method of discrimination that is experienced by this minority?
It's at all different levels. It's ethnic, it's linguistic, it's religious. Our language is considered profane and not accepted by Pakistan as a legitimate language.
What is the language?
Well, I speak a dialect of Tibetan. There are 3 or 4 different languages spoken in the area, which are related to Tajik language, Tibetan, Kashmiri language, and there's an unclassified language called Burushu, which is one of the 3 international languages considered as unclassified. So these languages are not taught in the local schools. Local religion is not taught in the local schools. The Sunni and the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam is being imposed, preaching jihad. And local people are discriminated based on their ethnicity. For instance, I can give you a few examples, like there's a Pakistani military institution called Frontier Works Organization, which is responsible to construct all the bridges and roads in Gilgit Baltistan, with more than, I think, 10,000 employees, and not a single person has been hired from Gilgit Baltistan. Similarly, the telecommunications sector is more than 95% Pakistanis. They take up the job, and the local people do not have access to those jobs. Most of these mining projects and these dam constructions, which are taken by the Chinese, they bring their own labor, so local people clash with them. There was a death that happened last year when local people tried to stop the Chinese from extracting minerals from their village. There are other forms of discrimination, which is mainly gender-based discrimination, and I would not, exclusively blame Pakistan for that. Obviously, local male population is also responsible for that.
And how many schools are in the area that would be considered elementary or secondary?
Well, the last time, if there was any credible information, was the World Bank census, and they said the male literacy is anywhere between 15 to 20%, and female literacy is less than 5%. But since last 20, 30 years, non-profit organizations like Aga Khan Foundation and USAID has given a lot of money into that. DFID has given a lot of money into that. French government, Canadian CIDA, CIDA, they have established a lot of schools. So privately funded schools have contributed to another about 20, 30% of literacy in the region.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.